I know yesterday's passage was a little intense, with Jesus ranting against the religious leaders. But don't worry. Today's is on the much lighter subject of... Never mind. Hi, I'm Justin Lee, and this is A Year of Bible. Today, in our year-long study of the New Testament, we're reading Matthew chapter 24. By the way, if you're enjoying our study, don't forget to let YouTube know by liking and subscribing and letting other folks know about it. Check the video description out for a link to the series playlist that has all the videos in order. You can share that with folks. Now, before we read today's chapter, I think a little background is helpful. We talked last week about how important the temple in Jerusalem was. Remember that? It was the single most sacred location for the Jewish people, which, of course, includes Jesus and his disciples. But at the beginning of today's reading, Jesus says something shocking. He says that the temple will be destroyed, and that not one stone will be left on another. And this would indeed happen, only about 40 years after Jesus said this. Now, we've talked a bit about how Jews in that time and place were living under Roman rule, and that there was a lot of tension between the Jews and the Romans. I've compared it a bit to the tension between, say, the American colonists and the British monarchy in the years leading up to the American Revolution. Well, in the year 66, I know it's weird to have these short year numbers like that, in the year 66, only about 30-something years after Jesus' death, a Jewish rebellion against Roman rule would turn into an all-out war for independence that would go on for years. The Jewish rebels would ultimately be unsuccessful in gaining their independence, and they would suffer terrible losses, one of which would occur in the year 70, when Roman forces attacked Jerusalem, killed thousands of people, and destroyed the temple. And you can imagine how utterly horrible that must have been for the Jewish people of that time. I mean, if the temple was so important and so sacred that people were ready to kill Paul for the rumor that he had brought a Gentile in, remember that? What would it mean for the temple to be not just desecrated, but completely destroyed? This event would ultimately change how Judaism is practiced around the world to this day, including ending the practice of those ritual sacrifices at the temple. This was one of those world-changing events where life would never be the same after. Like, for those of us who are old enough to remember it, there was life before the 9/11 attack on the US, and then there was life after 9/11. And if you're young enough that you don't remember what things were like before 9/11, it is impossible to explain how different certain things were. In a similar way, we sometimes talk about life before the COVID-19 pandemic and life after, and how the pandemic accelerated certain changes in our culture that haven't gone back to the way they were before. Well, I think it's fair to say that for Judaism, the destruction of the temple was bigger than either of those. Not in a literal sense in terms of lives lost or anything like that, but in terms of its long-term impact on the faith. I mean, this was an absolutely earth-shattering event. And Jesus predicts it here in Matthew 24. Along with some predictions of other things to come, including both things that the disciples are about to be facing and things that will happen when Jesus returns at the end of the world. And because he's addressing both of those things at once, scholars sometimes argue about which pieces of this chapter are describing things that are still future events for us, and which ones are describing things that were still to come for the disciples but have now already occurred, like the destruction of the temple. Perhaps some of them have dual meanings. So let's read, and why don't you see what you think? As Jesus left the temple and was walking away, his disciples came up to him to point out its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he replied. "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." While Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "See to it that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. These things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then they will deliver you over to be persecuted and killed, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time, many will fall away and will betray and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and deceive many. Because of the multiplication of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop come down to retrieve anything from his house, and let no one in the field return for his cloak. How miserable those days will be for pregnant and nursing mothers! Pray that your flight will not occur in the winter or on the Sabbath, for at that time there will be great tribulation, unseen from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be seen again. If those days had not been cut short, nobody would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you in advance. So if they tell you, 'There he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. Or 'Here he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprout leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you will know that he is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they were oblivious until the flood came and swept them all away. So will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day on which your Lord will come. But understand this, if the homeowner had known in which watch of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. For this reason, you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of his household, to give the others their food at the proper time. Blessed is that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked, and says in his heart, My master will be away a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not anticipate. Then he will cut him to pieces, and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, if you're expecting me to be able to tell you what all this means, I am sorry to disappoint you because I do not have that knowledge. As I've said, I think prophecies of the future are often much easier to understand looking back than looking forward. We've talked before about how easy it is to misunderstand them when you try to predict the future, and Jesus reminds us repeatedly that we won't be able to predict his return anyway, so I think it's a mistake to try to get too clear a picture of what all this means in advance. So rather than try to use a chapter like this to explain exactly what's going to happen in the future, which obviously I can't do, I try to look for what it's telling me to do in the here and now. What am I supposed to be watching out for? How am I supposed to be behaving? And there are several things Jesus warns us about here. He warns us that there will be many people falsely representing him, some claiming to be him, others claiming to see him or to speak on his behalf, false Christs and false prophets who will deceive even faithful Christians. Now, in our culture, we don't often see people claiming to be the second coming of Jesus, though I actually did see someone just this past week holding a sign with a picture of a man he claimed was the Messiah. But we do certainly see a lot of people in our culture who claim to speak for Jesus, despite, in some cases, standing for a lot of things that are the opposite of what Jesus taught. Have you noticed this? And what do you think? Have people like that deceived faithful Christians? Sadly, yes, I think they have. And it can badly hurt our reputation in addition to leading people astray. I grew up going to a church that emphasized the divide between Christians and the rest of the world, but as a result, I think I was often too quick to embrace anything and anyone that came with a Christian label. Oh, this is Christian music, it must be good. This is a Christian book, it must be true. This is a Christian teacher, I should listen to them. And that attitude can lead us Christians badly astray. We need to recognize that not everyone speaking in the name of Christ is speaking truth, or even speaking with good intentions. People can set out to trick us, using the name of Jesus to give themselves credibility, and to get us to believe them even when we should know better. And sometimes well-intentioned people can be deceived themselves. This is why we can't let others' opinions, even the opinions of fellow Christians, be our sole guide for determining what is true. That's also one reason I try to always be clear that everything I say in my videos, in my writings, in my public speaking, all of it is my best understanding, and I study hard and pray repeatedly for guidance and do my best to get things right and be open to correction, but I'm still human, which means I'm still fallible. So you shouldn't accept my human word, mine or anyone else's, as the final word on God. We all have to seek God's guidance and pray for discernment, that ability to see the truth clearly. Of course, when we start talking about false prophets, there's another potential danger here, which is that we start turning on each other, pointing fingers, and labeling everyone we disagree with as a false prophet, which I don't think is what Jesus calls us to at all. In fact, Jesus specifically warns us here that some of his followers will eventually betray and hate one another, and that the love of most will grow cold. And I think this at least gives us something to watch out for in false prophets and false teachers. If they inspire us to hate each other, or if we see their or their followers' love growing cold, that's a big red flag because that's not what Jesus taught. Now, that's not the only potential red flag, and we may talk more about false prophets when we get to some of Paul's letters, but it seems to me that that's at least a starting point for discernment in our current culture. If God's two greatest commandments are to love God and love our neighbor, where do we see that being practiced and where do we not see it practiced? And are we practicing it ourselves? Because the truth is, no, I don't think anyone can read this chapter and tell you exactly what's going to happen or when it will happen. And Jesus says so himself here. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. But he also gives us very specific instructions here at the end with this parable about the servant who has been put in charge to give the others their food at the proper time. Notice that this servant has a job to do, to take care of his fellow servants, just as our job is to love and care for the people around us. So we may not understand everything in this chapter, but the question to us here at the end is crystal clear regardless. If Jesus were to come back today, would he find us caring for others the way he taught us? Or would he find us selfishly only doing things for ourselves, or even worse, being unkind to those who displease us? Let us live today and every day as if it's the day that Jesus will come back, so that he would find us in the midst of loving others, attending to their needs like the faithful servants were called to be, even in those moments when it feels like the world is on fire. Because you never know.